Hello everybody, this is Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Part 1, Chapter 26. The next forenoon Levin left Moscow, and towards evening was at home. On the journey he talked with the people in the car about politics, about the new railroads, and just as in Moscow he felt oppressed by the chaos of conflicting opinions, weary of himself and ashamed without knowing why. But when he reached his station and perceived his one-eyed coachman, Ignat, in his kaftan, with his collar above his ears, when he saw in the flickering light cast by the dim station lamps his covered sledge and his horses with their neatly cropped tails and their jingling bells, when Ignat, as he tucked his robes comfortably about him, told him all the news of the village, about the coming of the contractor and how Pava the cow had calved, then it seemed to him that the chaos resolved itself a little, and his shame and dissatisfaction passed away. The very sight of Ignat and his horses was a consolation, but as soon as he had put on his touloup, which he found in the sleigh, and ensconced himself in his seat, and began to think what orders he should have to give as soon as he reached home, and at the same time examined the off-horse, which used to be his saddle-horse, a swift though broke-down steed, then indeed what he had experienced came to him in an absolutely different light. He felt himself again, and no longer wished to be a different person. He only wished to be better than he had ever been before. In the first place, he resolved from that day forth that he would never look forward to extraordinary joys such as had led him to make his offer of marriage. And in the second place, would never allow himself to be led away by low passion, the remembrances of which so shamed him when he had made his proposal. And lastly, he promised not to forget his brother Nikolai again, or let him out of sight, and to go to his aid as soon as it seemed needful, and that seemed likely to be very soon. Then the conversation about communism, which he had so lightly treated with his brother, came back to him and made him reflect. A reform of economic conditions seemed to him doubtful, but he was none the less impressed by the unfair difference between the misery of the people and his own superfluity of blessings. And he promised himself that, though hitherto he had worked hard and lived economically, he would in the future work still harder and live with even less luxury than before. And the effect upon himself of all these reflections was that throughout the long ride from the station he was the subject of the pleasantest illusions. With a full enjoyment of his hopes for a new and better life, he reached his house. The clock was just striking 10. From the windows of the room occupied by his old nurse, Agafya Mikhailovna, who fulfilled the function of the housekeeper, the light fell upon the snow-covered steps before his house. She was not yet asleep. Kuzma, awakened by her, barefooted and with sleepy eyes, hurried down to open the door. Laska, the setter, almost knocking Kuzma down in the desire to get ahead of him, ran to meet her master and jumped upon him, trying to place her forepaws on his breast. "You are back very soon, Batyushka," said Agafya Mikhailovna. "I was bored, Agafya Mikhailovna. 'Tis good to go visiting, but it's better at home," said he as he went into the library. The library was soon lighted with wax candles brought in haste. The familiar details, little by little, came home to him. The great antlers, the shelves lined with books, the mirror, the stove, the holes burned through long ago beyond repair, the ancestral sofa, the great table, and on the table an open book, a broken ashtray, a notebook filled with his writings. As he saw all these things, for the moment he began to doubt the possibility of any such change in his manner of life as he had dreamed of during his journey. All these signs of his past seemed to say to him, "No, thou shalt not leave us, thou shalt not become another, but thou shalt still be as thou hast always been, with thy doubts, thy everlasting self-dissatisfaction, thy idle efforts at reform, thy failures, and thy perpetual striving for a happiness which will never be thine." But while these external objects spoke to him thus, a different voice whispered to his soul, bidding him cease to be a slave to his past, and declaring that a man has every possibility within him. Listening to this voice, he went to one side of the room, where he found 2 dumbbells, each weighing 40 pounds. and he began to practice his gymnastic exercises with them, and endeavoring to fill himself with strength and courage. At the door, a noise of steps was heard. He instantly put down the dumbbells. It was the prickish-chick, who came to say that thanks to God everything was well, and that the wheat in the new drying-room had got burnt. This provoked Levin. This new drying-room he had himself built and partially invented, but the prickish-chick was entirely opposed to it, and now he announced with a modest but triumphant expression that the wheat was burned. Levin was sure that it was because he had neglected the precautions 100 times suggested. He grew angry and reprimanded the prickish-chick, but there was one fortunate and important event. Pava, his best and most beautiful cow, which he had bought at the cattle show, had calved. "Kuzma, give me my tulip, and you," he said to the prickish-chick, "get a lantern, and I will go and see her." The stable for the cattle was not far from the house. Crossing the courtyard where the snow was heaped under the lilac bushes, he stepped up to the stable. As he opened the door, which creaked on its frosty hinges, he was met by the warm, penetrating breath from the stalls, and the kine, astonished at the unwonted light of the lantern, turned around from the beds of fresh straw. The shiny black and white back of the Holland cow gleamed in the obscurity. Burkett, the bull, with a ring in his nose, tried to get to his feet, but changed his mind and only snorted when they approached his stanchion. The beautiful Pava, huge as a hippopotamus, was lying near her calf, snuffling at it and protecting it by her back as with a rampart from those who would come too close. Levin entered the stall, examined Pava, and lifted the calf, spotted the red and white on its long, awkward legs. Pava bellowed with anxiety, but was reassured when the calf was restored to her and began to lick it with her rough tongue. The calf hid its nose under its mother's side and frisked its tail. "Bring the light this way, Fyodor." "This way," said Levin, examining the calf. "Like its mother, but its hair is like the sire, long and prettily spotted. Vasily Fyodorovitch, isn't it a beautiful thing?" turning towards the prickish-chick, forgetting in his joy of the newborn calf the grief caused by the burning of his wheat. "Why should it be homely? But Simon the contractor was here the day after you left. It will be necessary to come to terms with him, Konstantin Dmitrich," replied the prickish-chick. "I have already spoken to you about the machine." The single phrase brought Levin back to all the details of his enterprise, which was great and complicated. And from the stable he went directly to the office, and after a long conversation with the prickish-chick and Simon the contractor, he went back to the house and marched straight into the parlor.